All right, hello, Facebook. This is Tommy Valentine, Executive Director for Historic Athens. We want to thank you for taking some time out of your day to join us for today's episode of This Moment in History, COVID-19 in Athens, Georgia. Today is episode 50 of a planned 55 episodes in this series. Each weekday at 1 o'clock, we have a live and interactive discussion with a community leader here in Athens, Georgia. In doing so, our hope is to explore and document the ways that this unique, often difficult, but historically important event is playing out in the lives of our local community leaders, elected officials, entrepreneurs, business owners, and the like. For those of you that tuned into yesterday's episode, and this is a good time to note that if you wish to go back and see some of the previous 49 episodes, you can do so at the video section of our Facebook page. But for those of you that tuned in yesterday, you know that we had some fortuitous timing. We had already scheduled, by sheer luck, representatives of the local organization ULEAD that works to help students who might be underdocumented to reach out and complete their dream of going to college. It just so happened that we had them on the program on the same day that the Supreme Court issued their decision to further protect DACA as a program. Well, for those of you tuning in today, you'll note that we have similarly fortuitous timing. Today, as an increasing number of Americans are coming to recognize and celebrate, is Juneteenth. We're going to talk a little bit more about Juneteenth in a moment, but I'll say that today's guest was someone we were thrilled to schedule because she is at the Venn diagram of so many different types of people we want to talk to, people that care about history, community leaders, elected officials. Linda Davis does all of those things. But also she's someone who I think for our viewers that aren't yet familiar with Juneteenth will be able to help outline a little bit about the importance of that for all of you. So we're really looking forward to having this discussion. If this is your first time interacting with Historic Athens, about halfway through the episode, we'll tell you more about how you can get plugged in. But for now, we want to go ahead and bring Linda on the line. Now, if you have a question, a comment, a word of encouragement for Linda as we're going through, please comment below the video stream, the live video stream on our main Facebook page, and we'll be happy to include it in today's discussion. Aside from that, we want to thank this week's sponsors, the Athens Downtown Development Authority. You can find them on Facebook under their Facebook page, Downtown Athens, Georgia. They invested in this week's programming, all 5 episodes, and we really appreciate their support, speaking as a 501c3. So thank you very much. We're going to go ahead and bring Linda on the line. Just one moment. All right. And Linda, let me turn on your microphone. All right, great. Linda, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
I am doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, well, we're thrilled to have you. Linda, you should be no stranger to many of our viewers. I don't think you require an introduction for many people in Athens, Georgia, but we do have viewers from all over the world. We also do have, we anticipate folks watching this generations from now. So maybe it would be wise for us to start with the question of who is Linda Davis? So could you take a moment just to introduce yourself and talk about your relationship to Athens?
I am delighted to do that, and I'm not so egotistical as to think that people know me, but do know that my desire is to be of service to this community and to the generations that follow me. So I am Linda Davis. I was born here in Athens, Clarke County. My mother was Maddie Jones Elder, and she was born here in Clarke County. Her parents and grandparents were also here in Clarke County. I know of my grandparents. I do not know as much of my great-grandparents. So that's 3 generations from slavery on my mother's side of the family. On my father's side of the family, he was born in Oconee County, and he is, I'm 2 generations from slavery. His father was born into slavery. My father was born in 1891.
Wow.
So yeah, that ages me a little bit, but I am the youngest girl of 7 children, 7 children by my father and mother. And then I have another sister that was much older. So we have made our lives here in Athens, Clarke County, most of our lives. At one point we did, or the family lived in Oconee County. I did not. I was born here in Athens at the historic Susan Medical Center on Hancock and Reese Street, Hancock and Chase Street. And I went to school here. I went to county schools. I went to Lyons Elementary, North Athens Elementary. I went to Clark Middle School as a part of the freedom of choice movement, as a part of desegregation. I graduated from Athens High School in 1969. It was a good year. So I graduated at Trojan. And then I took a year off because I was already working and really contributing to my family's livelihood. And then I actually entered the University of Georgia in the summer of 1970. And that's where I met and married Carlton Davis as he was about to be, after he was drafted. And I think we had gotten this word that they weren't sending married people to Vietnam. He doesn't remember this, but we talked about getting married so he wouldn't have to go to Vietnam. And so we did. And Carlton and I have 2 wonderful children. Chadwick Jarrell Davis is our firstborn. Chad is a retired lieutenant colonel in the Army, and he is at West Point, lives in West Point, New York with his family. He just retired this past year. And then I have wonderful Kimberly Davis. I think everybody knows Kim. So Kim is, wow, she's an awesome young lady. She is a journalist by trade and probably a lawyer by nature, but at any rate, Kim is my youngest, and Kim is back in Athens with me. We both returned to Athens in 2005. I came here after retiring from a beautiful 38-year career with Bell South, now AT&T, and Kim decided she wanted to pursue her master's in journalism. And so after graduating from Medill College in Chicago, she worked at Ebony Magazine for a while, and then decided, yeah, it was time to further that. So she came back for that and had a wonderful, wonderful experience at Georgia. And so with the, of course, in the Grady School, right? So you can imagine, my house is quite lively. It turns out in our conversations, and we've known this all along, that Carlton was the first person from LaGrange, Georgia, to be admitted to the University of Georgia. Wow. And so that was one of our conversations at dinner last night, just talking about what it was like back then for him, and also, you know, what's happening currently. And so literally, my niece, Jessica Davis, is at the University of Georgia now, and she's caught in the throes of the activities there with making changes on campus. So we have a busy household.
Yeah, busy household, lots of change makers in the household. Linda, I mentioned earlier that today is Juneteenth, and this is something I imagine we'll come back to in a moment. I want to spend more time on your biography and your relationship to Athens. But could you just, for viewers that are just tuning in, I want to make sure we set the stage for Juneteenth. Could you take a moment and just outline why that's such an important holiday?
Now, Juneteenth is probably the most prominent holiday in the African American experience. If we want to look at something that for the first time applied across the board to all African Americans in a positive way, it was when the soldiers finally made it to Texas to free the slaves. And that was the last bastion of slavery after the Civil War. Of course, May 4th is our Athens Day of Jubilee. And so that was the day that the slaves in Athens were freed. And at the time, there were 5,000 5,000 slaves and 5,000 white Americans here in Athens, Clarke County. So the Juneteenth celebration has been one that I really attribute its greatest prominence to Michelle Pearson at Ebenezer Baptist Church, because she really brought that to life for us. And every year we have celebrated it in a bigger way and brought more attention to it. So I applaud Michelle for what she brought to the community and saying, you know, this isn't a day-long thing. This should be longer. And so I was very excited to see that we've been doing 19 days of Jubilee based on the calendar that she put together, or Ebenezer Church West put together. So Day of Jubilee is I can't really describe it because every time I talk about it,
Mhm.
I try and live through that moment of what does it feel like to go to bed a slave and wake up free?
Mm.
And then what are the very first things that must be your priority? So that is something that I spend a lot of time thinking about what that must have been like for the ancestors as they experienced that.
Mhm.
Every time we have this celebration, I think about the so many firsts for them. You know, did the water taste different? Was the food
Mhm.
different? You know, did the air feel different? What did it really feel like? And so I've said on the at one of our celebrations downtown on our May 4th date, you know, there had to be excitement and joy. At the same time, there had to be fear and trepidation because it's all uncharted. And so it's interesting how the COVID-19 has put me right back in that space
Sure.
of having to think about, well, what is it like when you wake up free,
Right.
this threat? And so, yes, Juneteenth is extraordinary. And I literally picked up Michael Thurman's book today, and he has the Jubilee date on here. And there's a wonderful poem by W.W. Brown that, if we have time, I'd be willing to.
Would you go ahead, Linda? Please share it.
Okay, great. So this is on page 5, and it's called Jubilee, and it says, "See these poor souls from Africa transported to America. We are stolen and sold in Georgia. Will you go along with me? We are stolen and sold in Georgia. Come sound the Jubilee. See wives and husbands sold apart. Their children's screams will break your heart. There's a better day a coming. Will you go along with me? There's a better day a coming. Go sound the Jubilee." And that's from the Slave Narratives, and that was W.W. Brown.
And I know you mentioned Michael Thurman's book. It recently came back into print. I know the copy I have at one point I had to track down on eBay, but it is available again. Can you hold that up just so that our audience can
Yes.
track it down?
Can we see that clearly?
Yes, A Story Untold. And you know, we've been encouraging folks to shop with their local bookshop. When a book comes up, I tend to grab the link real quick and share it in the comments section. So I'm going to do that right now for those of you that may wish to pick up that book. It's an incredible book. Um,
And
uh,
it's updated. I was so excited about that when I got the book, when he had his signing a few months ago.
mhm.
I was just thrilled with the new updates. It's
Well,
captured a moment.
I'm gonna. So I'm sharing the Avid Bookshop link to that right now in the comments section. I'll flash that on screen. Linda, you said something a moment ago that I just kind of want to toss back and forth with you. So right now we're going through the pandemic of COVID-19. I think it was yesterday, one of our guests remarked that, you know, racism is a pandemic in itself. Slavery certainly was a pandemic in itself. Uh, and yesterday, one of our guests, one of the young students from ULEAD, said that, you know, part of their experience through this has been that they and their family have been playing board games again, like that they're stuck indoors and they're playing board games again. There's a board game that my family plays, not as much recently, but it's called Pandemic, believe it or not.
Yes.
And I'm going to tie this back into what you were saying about Day of Jubilee and Juneteenth. So in the game of Pandemic, if you're trying to defeat the pandemics, in this game, you can your goal is to effectively find a cure and treat it till the disease doesn't exist anywhere else on the map anymore. And you've got a lot of competing diseases going on at the same time. As you can imagine, this game isn't as fun to play these days. But I couldn't help but think of that scenario when you were comparing Jubilee to Juneteenth, because it's one thing to go to bed at night knowing, when you said, you know, does the water taste different? It's one thing to go to bed at night knowing that you're free. But I would imagine for enslaved people or recently freed, emancipated people, the knowledge that there was still slavery in Texas, the knowledge that there was still slavery somewhere, that in theory they could still be stolen and sent to this place where slavery still existed, felt like a very real threat. So it is the real power of Juneteenth is that that was the first time that African Americans everywhere in the country could go to bed knowing that no one else that looked like them was enslaved?
I think the power was in knowing that the enslaved were now freed.
Hmm.
And so the fear of crossing a county line, of crossing a state line was, I would imagine, greatly diminished.
Hmm.
And so my mom was an educator, as were her sisters and my uncle. And so my uncles also were military people. All of them
Hmm.
went to the military and served this country, and they all went overseas. And when we would have family gatherings, to hear them talk of what life was like in other places, and then to um, walk in my community where I live now and where I chose to live on coming back to Athens. It's where I grew up, and so I feel centered here.
Yeah.
Time literally has passed over places right here in Athens, Clarke County.
Right.
I have neighbors that essentially live off the grid, often out of poverty or lack of. And so I don't think that I ever get a sense that we're very far from what the ancestors felt and what
Hmm.
they experienced for various reasons. And so I'm not too much interested in that part of it. But what I do enjoy is the celebration of life that we have among ourselves, even in our state of poverty. I do take great pride, I would say, in the work that we're doing to restore the Brooklyn Cemetery and to honor those ancestors whose shoulders we truly are standing on.
Mm.
I don't think it's I don't I don't blame anybody. I think people often say to me, or some people say to me, "Well, how did it get to be such so rundown? How did it get to be so neglected?"
Hmm.
And then I just said, I can walk down my street and explain to you exactly how that happened. When the resources are gone, they're gone. And so that's the same thing that I think a lot of America and the world is experiencing. When we shut down the businesses, when we shut down people's access to income, regardless of how small the wealth building was,
Right.
that was the lifeline. And so now we have people who really are going to have to wake up when this is finally over and start over. And so they will experience a lot of the anxiety that I think the slaves must have felt when all of a sudden you're free, but you have nothing, you own nothing. We gave you no safety net. You had no money, you had no savings. You don't even know who your people are.
Right.
Yeah. So I hope that our pandemic never takes us to that extreme, to the point that we become strangers among ourselves. But I do hope that we recognize that this is brand new for all of us.
Right.
And the first crisis is simply survival.
You mentioned Michelle Pearson earlier. For those of you that are interested, we had Michelle on the program. She was one of our guests. I highly recommend folks going back to that episode. It was one of our favorite episodes we had. Michelle spoke very candidly, uh, which is, I imagine as a financial advisor, she's cautious sometimes, but she spoke very candidly on her feelings about the present. Linda, I know that due to the generations of history, local history that you carry with you and your just historical knowledge, I know that you have a lot to say about the past. Right now, we're not only dealing with COVID-19, we're dealing with a nationwide discussion about Black Lives Matter. We're seeing protests. We're seeing the reckoning with a lot of uncomfortable truths about our country and about equity. Right now, it's June 2020. How does June 2020 fit in with the historical arc that you know of here in Athens, Georgia?
June 2020 is still an enigma for me. I think the COVID response has shown me a piece of our community that, one, I didn't know that there was strong support for Black lives in Athens, Clarke County. That outpouring, as I watched it on YouTube, because we are totally sheltered in place with our pre-existing conditions in my household, I couldn't believe the number of people that were so vocal in terms of being supportive of stopping the racism. I think it is tragic. It is tragic to me, has been tragic to me, and will always be tragic when you have to have the explanation and the conversation with your children that you dearly love
Mm-hmm.
and want to experience life to its fullest. When you have to lift that curtain and expose them to the ugly truth of simply being born Black and the risks that are inherent in that. I talked to my son, and my grandson turned 7 yesterday, and he's already had to talk. And I'm like, wow, I wanted his
Right.
innocence to last a little bit longer. And so Kason's response to Chad was, but Dad, I just want friends to play with.
Right.
I just want to play. At 7, he just wants to play. And so there's a tragedy in our community when we have a society that is based on the difference and making the difference punitive to the African American experience at the expense of just being honest. I don't think it hurts anybody to face the truth.
Right.
And so I know one of the things that we'll probably talk about today is the truths around Athens, Clarke County. And honestly, one of my favorite places in Athens, believe it or not, is that Oconee Hill Cemetery. Because I walk through there and I see the history of this county. I see the history of Georgia, even the history of the nation, because of the influence generated out of the names that are on those tombstones and graves in the Oconee Hill Cemetery. It's a walking history book to go through there. And so, I was taught that if you don't know your past, then you're condemned to repeat it.
Yeah.
And so I think it's so important that we not bury the past. I think we need to tell the whole story.
Right.
And there's a whole untold story, as Michael's title of his book is. It's just a story untold. And so we need to tell those stories of the other people in this community that contributed so much.
Right.
Starting with the Native Americans and moving forward through all of the other ethnicities that have come in, built, and become a part of Athens' fabric. Those stories need to be told, and they need to be told as prominently as the other stories are told.
Linda, so we share this feed mainly on our Historic Athens page. I also use a Facebook feature called Watch Party that lets me share it on my personal page. And so someone commented on that feed, Wesley Johnson. I want to share his comment with you and have a conversation about it. I can't flash it on screen the way I will in a moment with Lyra Rhodes's question. But Wesley wrote, as you were talking, this is an extremely hard conversation to have with my young boys also. And Wesley Johnson, he himself is an African-American man. And so that's a different discussion to have. Linda, I had the same thought a couple weeks ago. My daughter, there's this book series, I think it's called like Little People, Big Dreams. And my daughter's 2.5 years old. And each book, they're kind of like golden books, but they each focus on a different historic person. And, beautiful art. They tell the story of everyone from like Zaha Hadid, the architect, to Ada Lovelace, who helped design binary code. I mean, these stories, we have tried to make sure that whenever possible, she's growing up with the stories of powerful, important African-American leaders. And so where this bridges what you were saying and what Wesley was saying is, I found myself the other night reading through, we had grabbed the one for Harriet Tubman, the one for Martin Luther King, and the one for Rosa Parks. And these books are beautiful, but it's a kid's book. And so they feel like they have to wrap it up in a happy way. I mean, to read the books, you would think that the individuals I just named ended racism or ended slavery, that this ended. And I had the difficult thought, and I mean, obviously, I as a white man have different choices on this, but I had the difficult thought of, when do I tell Nora what happened after this? How do we celebrate the legacies of the people that fought for justice without making it seem like that fight is over? And your kids are a bit older. You've grappled with this in your own way. For people like Wesley, who's grappling with it with his young boys, for people like myself, they're grappling with their young children. Do you have thoughts on how to start sharing that story untold from a young age?
I really do. I spend a lot of time thinking about this because when I talk to my grandchildren, I don't sugarcoat things.
Mhm.
And so when they bring me something, and not just my grandkids, the kids in the Sunday school class and at my church and wherever I am, when they ask those hard questions about why am I hated, or
Mm.
why do why do black people have to be different like this, or why are we treated this way, I just tell them the absolute truth as I know it. And I let them know that this is my truth the way I know it.
Right.
And I make sure that they understand that it is not personal, it's not directed to them. These are learned behaviors. And so, I feel strongly that it is so important to tell the children the truth. And yes, you want to definitely um, make sure that your values come through in the telling. And so if you have a view that it was a horrible thing, then make sure you say that it was a horrible thing. And it's something I wouldn't want you to be a part of. And that's what I have to say to my children and to other people's kids that I'm around is, you just don't want to become a statistic. And so there's some things that whether you like it or not, or whether you agree or not, you're going to have to do those things for now. And then you go work to try and make a change on them. And then sometimes it's just going to come to a point where you're going to have to stand.
Right.
And so that has to be age appropriate. And I'll tell you a Chad story. Carlton was in the military police in Germany. And when we moved back when he got out of service, we were living at the time we were living at my parents' home. Because it was just me. And I brought Chad back in like February. I brought him back around Mother's Day, I think it was the year he was born, because he was born in Germany. And then we moved into married housing. Out of merit housing, we got to know our neighbors, and he came back and he was a university policeman. And so he had a community of people that he interacted with. I was working at the phone company, so I had a community of people that I was interacting with. And then at some point, they said, he found a duplex. He says, well, let's move out of merit housing and move over here so that we don't have to stay in school the rest of our life. So
Right.
that started our exit from UGA. But we moved into over on Eastwood Court, right next to the cemetery of the East Lawn Cemetery. And it was mostly military, University of Georgia police families.
Mm.
And I remember Chad and his playmate, they were about 3 years old and 3 or 4. And the little boy, his little playmate came out and said to him, I don't play with the N words.
Mm.
Okay. And Chad said, me neither. Right?
Mm.
Because he had no concept. He had no earthly idea of what he was saying. And he certainly didn't know what his playmate was saying. Well, the adults in us, Carlton, totally took that back to his coworker and said, where did your son learn this? And why is he allowed to say things like this?
Yeah.
Right? Because it introduced a whole level of complexity and for the adults. But the kids kept playing,
Right.
because they resolved it by, I think the little boy did say to Chad, well, you're one, or something like that. And he says, well, okay, then why don't I just be purple from now on?
Yeah.
And so they fixed it the way children will fix it when they don't understand the complexities of it. But at 4 years old, he was already having to stand up for himself.
Right.
We didn't say anything to him. He didn't get the talk then, right? Because it wasn't a talk for the kids. It wasn't a talk. It was a talk for adults.
Well, and that's what I'm trying to get at is, I think that we're seeing in June 2020, that enigma you mentioned earlier. What I see that's encouraging is that we're seeing this shift in the dialogue from a previous view where it was sufficient for folks to be not racist, to an expectation that folks figure out quickly how to be anti-racist. And by folks, I mean specifically white folks. That wasn't a choice that anyone else was given prior to that. I think a lot of times, it's obviously our job as Historic Athens to think about history. And I think a lot of times I see people act as if the more difficult parts of history, and I appreciate you saying this isn't the case, that somehow you have to wait till they're in high school to have these difficult discussions, or in middle school to have these difficult discussions. For me, Phyllis Stewart, was our principal at Gaines when I was at Gaines. And I remember one of the more important things that I think ever happened was 3rd or 4th grade. I think we did a reenactment of the Underground Railroad. I remember I was assigned to be Thomas Garrett, who was one of the leaders on the Underground Railroad. And that was the first time I found out that some of the people that assisted in the Underground Railroad just disappeared or were killed. And it was this early introduction to sometimes justice requires a sacrifice. And I was able to understand that in elementary school, at least on some level.
Sure.
Do you think that a lot of times parents are underestimating their own children on when they're ready to have these discussions?
I do believe that we carry our guilt with us.
Mhm.
And so we discussed the monument downtown, obviously at the dinner table. That's been a 3-night discussion. Hopefully we won't have to do it again tonight. But and we're a house divided. We are. I think the monument honestly belongs in a place of prominence so that we don't forget.
Mm.
We should never forget. And so when we start hiding history, as we have hidden the history of the African American community, then people grow up in this vacuum with no knowledge of their past. And I think that we own our past. And so I was raised in the Baptist, second and fourth Sunday Baptist house and first and third Sunday Methodist, all African American churches. But we were taught at an early age to hate the sin, but love the sinner. And that was drilled into us. And I really do believe that it is foundational to my survival as I grew into awareness of hatred, as I grew into receiving bitterness, as I grew into receiving racist remarks and being treated unfairly. I had to separate myself from the sin in order to love the sinner. And so I couldn't internalize that, or I would be a very angry person, I think. And so I do believe that there's some value in establishing for yourself a core set of values that you can live by.
Right.
And you'll be challenged from time to time, and I'm challenged from time to time. But I don't see a single person that I can't look at with love, regardless of how horrible what they have done.
Yeah.
Because I do know that that's learned behavior. I don't condone it. I don't excuse it, because as adults, we have a responsibility to at some point take a stand. And when we take that stand, then it has to be a stand that's grounded on who we are, who we want to be, what contributions we want to make to society. It can't be about being popular. It can't be about advancing somebody else's agenda. It has to be personal, and it has to be your personal commitment to making this world a better place. Because you do know, as adults, by now, most of us know where we came from. We know what got us to this place.
Thanks, Linda. I see Ginger chiming in saying, so wise with a heart. So thank you, Ginger, and thanks for tuning in. Linda, I want to very briefly thank our annual sponsors. And then spend the rest of the program with you, splitting our time between COVID-19, but then also this idea of what is the untold story of Athens, because I think that more people deserve to hear about that. When we come back here in just about 60 seconds, I'd like to start that conversation by having you answer Lyra Rhodes's question here.
Okay.
So Lyra Rhodes asked, how has Brooklyn Cemetery been part of Juneteenth? I would just like to come back and talk more about Brooklyn Cemetery in general, as well as Lyra's question. And so, Linda, is that okay? When we come back, we'll talk about Brooklyn.
That sounds great.
Okay. So everyone just stick with us. It's only going to take about 60 seconds. Historic Athens is a 501c3 nonprofit. We are celebrating 52 years in service of celebrating and conserving community heritage in Athens, Georgia. We're constantly working to improve our approach and our efforts on that to help them be more equitable, to help tell the whole story, as we've talked about here. If you support that mission, you can become a member or sponsor like Athens.com. Membership begins at only $5 a month. You or your household could become a member. Also, we want to make sure we thank all the sponsors you see here for supporting our mission throughout the year, as well as Athens Downtown Development Authority for supporting this week's episodes. As soon as this episode is over at 2 o'clock, if you'd like, you can head over to the Facebook page for the Athens Welcome Center, which we operate. Each weekday at 2, their staff is offering a different live cast experience, either a tour of a historic site or a virtual workshop live from the Welcome Center itself. It's completely free. You can head over there. If you're looking for a quick way to support Historic Athens, you can go to historicathens.com to pick up one of our 3 limited edition t-shirts, one for Boulevard, one for Rock Springs Historic District, and one for famous buildings and historic buildings of Athens. The shirts are only $19.99, and they go to support us and are printed locally by Satisfactory Printing. And then one last note here before we get back to Linda. As we mentioned, today is episode 50 of 55. If you want to go back to see any of our past conversations, Chief Sproul, Mayor Gertz, Suki Jansen from Solid Waste, Michelle Pearson, Broderick Flanagan, any of these important community leaders, Cheryl Leggett, Josh Jones, please feel free to head back to the video archives here on our Facebook page and check out those conversations. We'd love to have you be a part of that. Next week is our last week, wrapping up with a conversation with Commissioner Mariah Parker on Friday the 26th, and a few makeup episodes we're going to do for a few folks that had to reschedule. So thank you so much, and we hope you tune back in. So Linda, thank you so much for allowing us to share all that with our audience. Let's get back to Brooklyn Cemetery, including Lyra's question. So can you tell us more about your work with Brooklyn Cemetery? Oh, I'm sorry, Linda. 1 second.
I'm sorry.
Start over again, if you don't mind.
So great. Brooklyn Cemetery is one of 2 African-American cemeteries established in about 1882. That's the date that I'm choosing because that's what our research showed us. And this is 17 years after slavery in Athens, Clarke County. They were both burial societies established so that those people coming out of slavery would have a decent burial place. They wanted a place, a final resting place for themselves and certainly for their descendants to come. And so again, 17 years after slavery, we didn't have very many institutions established for African Americans. We were totally into the Jim Crow era, where Blacks still out of slavery just were subjugated and still had no rights and no opportunities, not a lot of opportunities. And so we were making our own. And I think that was admirable. So the cemetery fell into disrepair after the societies that established them, the trustees died. And so Brooklyn is on its 3rd set of trustees now, and we do have a succession plan so that, you know, it won't fall. If it falls into disrepair, you at least have some people that you can go to and talk about that. In terms of its relationship to Juneteenth, we're not there yet. If this were our normal time, the cemetery would be beautiful by now. We would have had it cleaned up, and you would have been able to walk through there and go visit the graves of the people who built this community for us. You can walk through there now because we've kept the road pretty well cleared, but we haven't been able to take advantage of the wonderful volunteer work that our students and our partners at Serve UGA do for us throughout the year. So we typically get well over 3,000 volunteer hours at the cemetery every year, coordinated through the service organizations at UGA. So again, going forward, we hope to at some point have it so that you can walk through our cemetery just like you can drive through Oconee Hill Cemetery, and you can actually see the contributions of the people and the names of the people that built this community. So that's my answer, my short answer, I guess, to the Juneteenth celebration part of that.
And Linda, as you're going here, I want to share that I've shared a link in the comments section to a UGA photo gallery of Brooklyn Cemetery that several of the nameplates. I've also shared on screen the sign at the entrance of Brooklyn Cemetery, as well as some of the incredible. That's a Harold Rittenberry, is that right?
That's Mr. Harold Rittenberry. His gates. He literally lives 60 yards from the cemetery as the crow flies. And so he came up with that inspiration just from a visit to the cemetery one day. We were talking about at some point having a gate. And thanks to Reverend Abraham Mosley of the Mount Pleasant Baptist Church, he introduced the concept of an entrance rather than worrying about a gate. And so now we have a beautiful entrance to our cemetery. And I hate to start naming names because so many people have been so extraordinarily instrumental in the work that we've done at the cemetery. But we are a 100% volunteer organization. We are fortunate to have Historic Athens as our fiscal agent so that we don't have to get any more formal as an organization than we have to. But again, we have someone to help us and help guide us in this restoration effort for the cemetery. So we're grateful, and we're grateful to you, Tommy, and the work of Historic Athens.
Of course. Well, I have an organization to run because we've had great trustees, which is another thing that you've done in Athens as well. I do want to highlight here, and of course, Kimberly, who we talked about earlier, is one of our trustees right now. So, and Kimberly's good at many things. Keeping us on our toes is definitely one of them.
I'm so happy to share that with you.
Oh no, I have never written a sentence that Kimberly can't make better. So that journalism training comes in handy. I did share in the thread here the link. For those of you that might be inspired to give to Brooklyn Cemetery, it is a tax-deductible donation. We process it and monitor the funds for Brooklyn Cemetery, but the funds do go directly to Brooklyn Cemetery. So you can give through the link I just shared in the comment section there. Linda, I want to share another question from our audience here. So Francis Oliver, who's actually one of our interns, really phenomenal intern, just chimed in to say, thank you for your remarks. I saw you speak at a screening of Below Baldwin last year and was very moved by your stories and dedication. Can you share a piece of local history or the story of an individual interred at Brooklyn Cemetery you wish Athenians appreciated or knew better? Is there anyone in particular you want to highlight from Brooklyn Cemetery or a historical figure you'd like to talk about?
I can, if I went down the row on the A section of Brooklyn Cemetery, it's like walking through my community as I grew up. And so Dr. Andrew Jones, mom, Susan Jones, is in the Brooklyn Cemetery. And so he was her inspiration for him building the first African-American hospital, maternity hospital in Athens, Clarke County. And so their graves are there and they really need attention. And so those are probably two prominent things that I would like to see us really concentrate on as we work on our restoration efforts. I'll tell you two things that haunt me, and they literally haunt me. They're two young boys. They were 14, I believe, and maybe 11, I can't remember, but they're on one of our, I took a picture of their headstones, and I don't know their story. But again, as soon as time permits, I am going to commit myself to understanding who they are and what happened to them because they died on the same day.
Wow.
And then there's another set of brothers who died on the same day, and I do know their story. They were killed in an automobile accident. And I was alive during that time. I was a little bit older than they were. But I want Brooklyn Cemetery to become a gateway, if you will, to the history of Athens. I want those names researched. I want the families researched. I want the stories told. These were the maids. They were the butlers. They were the drivers. They were the porters. These were the people who literally created a life and an I guess the entrepreneurial spirit was there for them as well. They are the foundation of what African Americans in Athens experienced as free people. And so, yes, I think Brooklyn has an extraordinary connection there. I can't ever think about Brooklyn without thinking about Baldwin Hall. And so one of the things that just hit me like a ton of bricks when we dug up the remains and then decided to reinter them at the feet of their masters, it literally sent me into almost a depression because these people worked so hard to have a final resting place for themselves. And if we're going to dig up their ancestors and my ancestors, why wouldn't we reinter them in a place with their descendants?
Right.
That's what Oconee Hill, the whole history of Oconee Hill is about, finding relatives and putting them back with their family members. And so we have a reinterment site planned for Brooklyn, and that's one of our fundraising efforts that we're working on now. And thankfully, we are somewhat funded in that initiative. And so that's something that we want to make sure happens. I want the cemetery to be a place that the kids at Clark Middle and the kids at Alps Road can walk through and see names and be curious about those names and go explore those names and understand what the contributions were of the unnamed people in this community. And so, yes, I think it's important for my generations and the generations to come, for my grandkids to come search in Athens, Clarke County and find out, yeah, your grandparents were here, your great-grandparents were here, and these are kinds of things that they did, and this is what life was like for them. I don't want us, and thank you for making this segue, thank you for documenting what it's like for us going through this pandemic. It would be tragic if 100 years from now, no one had talked to the people to say, what are you experiencing now?
Right.
And where do you expect to go? And so I wish we had more time, but we don't. And so I do know that our schools are going to be transformed. I believe how we live is going to be transformed. I believe how we live in community with others is going to be transformative.
Right.
If we choose to do that, but it will be our choice. And I think that just as we have people who absolutely don't see a path forward to be in unity with the African American community, they're going to be here still. And so my hope is that we will have made some headway and that we have begun to reach out and begun to cross bridges.
Yes.
Or build bridges, and that'll just get better. And we'll just have to keep repeating it. And honestly, we are going to have to just keep repeating it until we get there.
So, Linda, let me say this. First of all, I don't turn into a pumpkin at 2 o'clock. So our only limit is the fact that you do 8,000 things and that you probably need some time to yourself. But certainly, yeah, even as we're having this conversation, I'm feeling claustrophobia start to set in because I'm thinking, oh, I want to go down this rabbit hole with her, or I want to ask her this question.
Oh, we can do that, Tommy. So we have to definitely police ourselves.
Yeah. No, but I mean, we're effectively trying to have one conversation in an hour to cover lifetime's worth of knowledge that you have, perspective that you have, and knowledge that not everyone who tunes in has been able to be exposed to yet. The good news is I know that our organization, Brooklyn Cemetery, Asala, a number of other groups are working to try to develop a public history day in July where we might be able to spend some more dedicated time with you on air. And so I look forward to another conversation. I'm going to go to two of the comments I see submitted here. By the way, Linda, I did want to say on the private thread that Wesley Johnson, who we referenced earlier, said thank you to you. Thank you for sharing, Miss Davis. He was the one who was raising young boys, talking about trying to share tough truths. I see Alex Sams jumped in to say it would be wonderful to learn the stories of those buried at Brooklyn. We need more connection with African Americans of the old days. Thank you for saying that, Alex. And then Deborah Gonzalez, this will be our last user submitted question. And then Linda, you and I will wrap up with our last 3 questions. But and Lyra Rhodes said, thank you. This is very informative and helpful. I'm going to segue into Deborah's question, Linda. Linda,
okay.
You are someone who is constantly wearing several hats. And so when you're having conversations in the community, sometimes you're there as a representative of the school board. Sometimes you're representative of your family. Sometimes you're representative of Brooklyn Cemetery. It's a lot of different things, but you are someone who is a very good conversationalist. You're someone who can lead in an engaging conversation. And I think oftentimes you have a good agenda where I don't have many conversations with you where I feel like you're trying to get us to a better place, And so that's harder when these conversations are having to happen virtually. And so Deborah's question is very appropriate as we consider COVID-19. She said, always enjoy conversations with you in person or listening online. Have your conversations been affected by COVID? Have they changed in format or themes? So how has COVID-19 affected those conversations and your advocacy in the community?
So honestly, I think that in terms of it's difficult not to be in person, but I am also co-convener with the Athens Community Agenda.
Mm-hmm.
And I honestly, when we had our candidate forum this year, I could not have dreamed that our live stream would be viewed by over 400 people within an hour. And so the wonderful thing about that is, had it not been for COVID-19, we would not have live streamed it.
Mhm.
And so we wouldn't have been able to share more. So I'm a little bit on the technology part of Loving Life too.
Mhm.
So COVID has forced us to be creative and a little bit more succinct in how we present information. I really think it's a great forum for talking about, for having difficult conversations. I think our body language means a lot to us. And I
Mhm.
know that I react to other people's body language when we're sitting face to face.
Yeah.
But on the camera, yeah, you can't even see me wringing my hands over here and doing crazy things like that. So I think that COVID has forced us to choose.
Right.
And so the things that we want to do, we found a way to do them. And the things that weren't as important have simply fallen by the wayside. I think the environment has forced us to really stop and think as a family unit, or especially if you're fortunate to share your home with someone else, to look at them differently too, and to kind of learn how to respect boundaries all over again,
Right.
to do planning and to actually communicate with people. That has been remarkable for me, and I've enjoyed that a lot. And I've enjoyed the millions of webinars and calls that I've been on too, and hearing people speak honestly about what's important. I
Mhm.
think COVID-19 has shown us that a lot of the artificial things that we created, including relationships and causes and purposes, just aren't that meaningful when it
Right.
comes down to simply our survival. And so we really do have to get back to basics and understand that we don't live on an island, that we truly are in the same boat. And
Yeah.
so how do we make the boat stay afloat for all of us?
Yeah.
That has come to the surface.
Linda, I said that was going to be the last user submitted question, and I don't want to be selfish of your time, but a good mutual friend of ours, Kim Klinowski, just sent me a message. She's watching, but having difficulty getting her question submitted as a comment, and so I want to make sure I just share it. You talked about these conversations. You talked about the audiences of these conversations. Right now at the peak of this conversation today, you and I, it's only been about 24 people watching. But
Uh-huh.
so many people are at home watching videos these days that the average one of these videos, like the one that you and I are having right now, is reaching about 1,500 to 2,000 people. Um,
Wow.
we recently dug into our Facebook numbers, and just since April, um, if they give you this figure of how many minutes of video have been viewed by the audience, and we have had over 52,000 minutes of video, historic
That's
programming. So it does raise this question of how do you reach audiences,
awesome.
what people are receiving, how this might be changing people's appetites for history and how we're presenting it to people. And so it's with that current situation in mind, this idea that so many more people are hungry for history, that there's opportunities to change how and when. I want to present what Kim shared with me. So Kim said, "Can you ask Linda, with the discussion of truth, stories, and children, how do we, all of us, work with CCSD and its families, our neighbors and friends, to get this same important history that is sometimes glossed over in our schools?" And especially importantly when it may not be in our history. So much of what we learn about Juneteenth, recently there's been this big wave of understanding about the Tulsa Massacre, which was something that was kept out of our history books. What can we in Athens do as neighbors, as supporters of CCSD, as people to support a better understanding of history in our classrooms?
Thank you. That's a great question. I love you, Kim Klimowski. She is an amazing supporter of history in Athens, Clarke County, and certainly the African American community's history as well. I think that we need to write it. I do. I think that a lot of books are being written today, and with social media and the ability to create a 5-minute podcast or whatever, there are so many ways that we can get the history told.
Mm.
And it's going to always be from the perspective of the teller, right? And so I think it's important that all of the history be told. I think that students and teachers have an opportunity to take advantage of this moment and do exactly what you're doing. Have their students go out and capture their family's experience and what's going on here. we can take a walk through any cemetery in Athens, Clarke County and pick up names, look at dates, and determine, this person lived. And so what was between that birth and date? What's the dash about? And let's start creating those kinds of insights into our history. Greater Bethel AME Church does a beautiful job every year with their African American read-in, where they celebrate African American authors. And so honestly, Judge Patricia Barron is one of the quiet giants in our community, but she has a beautiful storybook collection, a coloring book collection. And so how do you have the difficult conversations? You introduce them in non-threatening ways to children. And it's kind of like you trick them into learning. And so, yes, I think we have so many opportunities to do that. It's not lost with me that when Dr. Demond Means came to our community, he fit the bill of exactly the person that we were looking for to lead us into this big change in terms of turning education on its heels so that we can bring equity into our lens, right? And I could not believe when I opened Michael's book that he actually has page 95, and he talks about Dr. Means and his visionary stance that he brought and the courage that he brought for us to face ourselves, to face the things that we've done in the past and to try and bring about change. And it's not lost on me that amid the coronavirus, he's silent.
Thanks for sharing that. So, okay, so everyone wants to talk to Linda. Everyone wants to ask a question of Linda. We're going to have to figure out a way to have another conversation with you, Linda. I did see Julie Denton, one of our supporters over at First American, just said how much she enjoyed the conversation. So thank you, Julie. Okay, so Linda, let's focus on the worst part of the show, which is wrapping up. We don't want to wrap up, but we've got to wrap up at some point. Linda, we have 3 questions left for you. They're rather quick.
Okay.
The first one is, if you woke up tomorrow and this were all over, every place was open again, it was safe to go out, and let's say that you had the day off, how would you spend that day in our community? Where would you go?
I would make a beeline to the Grace Healthcare Center in Tucker, Georgia, which is where my sister, who had her 80th birthday celebration this year, is currently living. I miss her. I want to hug her. I want to hold her. I want to collect her story. I want to be with my big sister. So that's where I would be.
I can't imagine anything more important than that. Speaking of family, Linda, and thanks for sharing that. We have a very important cameo in our comments section from the one and only Kimberly Davis, jumping in with a hi, mommy. So hi, hi, Kimberly.
We're in the same house. I'm telling you, we're miles apart.
No. I honestly, there's been 1 or 2 points in this conversation where I was kind of hoping Kimberly would make a surprise cameo. But I feel like I could have tilted the conversation into certain controversies and assured that, but we'll have to have Kimberly on her own episode, or have an episode called House Divided, and we can just talk about some of these topics.
That would be good.
Honestly, I don't need to be in that conversation. It could just be you two. I would rather sit back and watch that unfold. The second to last question concerns historic places. Linda, when this is over and we come out of this, we'll likely also be coming out of a recession. And as exciting as that will be, after a recession, a lot of times you have pent up development pressures that can spill out into and endanger historic places. And so we're really trying to prepare for that, to think about which are the most important historic places in Athens that must be protected. In your mind, if somebody's watching this interview 50 years from now, what are some historic places that you hope we continue to protect so that that 50 years from now person has the opportunity to visit?
So obviously, African American communities, the few that are still kind of here, West Broad School is number 1 on my list of places that need to be protected. And then the second thing on my list would be the Reese Street School over on, which is now the Masonic Lodge. Yes. the VFW, well, the VFW, but also the AMVATs, or the former AMVATs on Magnolia, are the other two buildings. Now, I grew up on the west side, so obviously this is the part of town that I'm most familiar with.
Mhm.
I think the normal school, which is now the home of Hurley Funeral Home, needs to be protected as well. And just this year for Memorial Day, I went out with the with the auxiliary of the VFW, of which I am a member, and at 7:30 in the morning, we went out and put flags on the graves of the veterans.
Mhm.
And that entire cemetery was pretty much covered in flags. It's not in danger of anything, but I think it needs to be recognized
Mhm.
as the place that returning servicemen established so that they could have a more permanent and cared for space
Mhm.
for their ancestors. So obviously I'm really deep into the burial things here. So that's one that we need to get some historic recognition around,
Mhm.
even in terms of whether the protection I think will be there for it. And people are telling me about other cemeteries around Athens, Clarke County. So yes, to continue the work of documenting those places and somehow recognizing that they exist. And I think anybody that was there when I was on Historic Athens board, I talked about one day they were going to wake up, if I ever won the lottery, and there would be signs all over Athens that said HBACC, which is Historically Black Athens, Clarke County. I was going to go and put those signs in our neighborhood so that
Mhm.
when people come back home to visit after 20, 30 years, they can still find their way around, because you wouldn't recognize the places that you grew up in Athens today if you came back after being away for a while. Those are pretty much my priorities that I spend time on. Of course, Gospel Pilgrim in Brooklyn, I have a vision for where I want them to be. And so I try not to say it too often because I don't want to
Yeah.
frighten people. But
Sure.
yes, I do have dreams for all of that.
Thank you. And hopefully we can keep working together to try to turn those dreams into a reality. Uh, Linda, the theme I feel like with our conversation today has been about truth and about how we make sure our communities understand and celebrate truth. A little later today, we're going to be making a post on the Historic Athens page encouraging people to find out more about Juneteenth. And as we close out our interview with you today, I was just reflecting on one strange element of Juneteenth, just a fact I happen to know, which is uh, Texas has lots of different excuses on why the slaves were not freed on time. And one of because there was a 2.5 year gap there.
Right.
One of the excuses that they have is that the messenger sent to Texas to deliver the news was murdered on the way. And so their idea is that we didn't get that message. It's not always easy to be the messenger, and we know that that's a role that you have taken on yourself in this community to be that messenger, often at times at personal risk, at great sacrifice. And so I want to make sure before we get to our last question that we thank you for being that messenger, and the burden that it places on you. We see it, and we thank you for that sacrifice. So thank you, Linda. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. And I don't consider sacrifice. It's the least I can do.
Yes, of course. Well, and so when we think about messages, and I appreciate, I guess for a strong person, it might not feel like sacrifice, although that's what it looks like to us outside of that. But let's talk about the message that we're going to close with. So our last question, Linda, is this: we envision these interviews are going to be given to our local libraries and research institutions. We imagine future generations will be able to look back at them. If somebody's watching this 100 years from now, what would you want that person to know about Athens in this moment?
Wow. I'm actually proud of Athens in this moment. I think that the values that I grew up with are being displayed by so many people. I think that there are four things I want to say. And one is, you really have to hate the sin, but love the sinner,
Mm.
because you're never going to abandon your family. The second one is something that there's three questions that a wonderful Sunday school teacher taught me, asks us every Sunday at the beginning of our classes. Her question was, who are you?
Mm.
Whose are you?
Mm.
To whom do you belong?
Mm.
And then what are you here for? And that framed every single conversation that we had. And I live that.
Mm. Well, thank you for that message. And these can be difficult times, but you've made them more encouraging, or at least reminded us of our duty to do things. So, Linda, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm so glad this is recorded. I never know how these things went. So I'm going to go actually listen to this one. Thank you, Tommy.
Of course.
And thank you for all the comments.
Of course. And yes, thank you to everyone. Thank you to Kimberly, Ginger, Lyra, Alex, Deborah, everyone who commented, Francis, Wesley, so many others. So thank you. We will be back on Monday at 1 o'clock. And we look forward to doing this again. Linda and I are about to jump offline. Be safe out there. Be healthy. Take care of yourself and others. And have a great day. Happy Juneteenth. Thank you.
Thank you.